Welcome, Philip Hughes. Fantastic to have you with us again. There's been lots of really positive feedback on our first conversation. If people haven't seen that video, there will be a link on YouTube down below so you can catch up on what Philip had to say last time we met. This time we are talking about the nominals who are out there and how we may actually be able to engage with them. So welcome, Philip. Did you just want to start off by just sharing with us some of the research, the data on the nominals who are actually out there and what it means to be a nominal?
Sure. The census was bad news in a sense, in as far as we found a significant drop in the numbers identifying with the various Christian churches, and certainly the drop in the Uniting Church was very significant. And yet there are still 44% of Australians who identify with a Christian denomination. Now, on the other hand, there's only about 10% or a little over 10% who actually attend a church and are thus involved, which means that there's still sort of 30% of the population who have named themselves, identified themselves with a Christian denomination, such as the Uniting Church, on the census, but are not involved. And in a sense, I feel that they're good to try to engage. They haven't really dropped out yet, as so many other people have.
So you're saying that they haven't dropped out because they're still identifying themselves in some sense as being Christian?
Yes. Yeah, so that's what nominal means, that they've got the name, they've retained the name, and but they're not particularly active. They're not involved in our religious activities. So those nominal people, the group of people who are nominal has actually been shrinking, and there's quite a lot of the nominal people from past censuses who've dropped away, and I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that you no longer need in our society to identify yourself as a Christian to be a good citizen. In fact, sometimes it's the opposite. But these people are still retaining that identification.
So some of that is about the fact that we're a multi-cultural and multi-faith community, right?
Yes, it is. It is. Yes. So there's various reasons why people have retained the name, but at the heart of it, it does mean something to people. There's been another way that I've looked at it too, in terms of another survey rather than the census, and certainly the survey of Australian social attitudes of 2018 showed that there was 22% of Australian adults who described themselves as both religious and spiritual, and yet only half of them are actually involved, are actually active in any religious organisation.
So we hear a lot about the spiritual but not religious.
Yes.
We hear a lot about the spiritual but not religious. So you're saying these are the people who are the spiritual and religious.
That's right. And that group is round about the same size as the spiritual but not religious. Now, most of the spiritual but not religious are quite antagonistic to the church.
Yep.
And it's unlikely that you're going to get them involved in a church. Many of them have dropped out and have got a beef against religion.
Yep. So what about these ones who are saying that they are spiritual and they are religious?
Yeah. Well, a lot of them attended when they were young, but they've sort of since fallen away. And it's probably, for many of those people, a matter of priorities. That life is busy. More than most sectors of the population, they are really busy with work, full-time employment, and they've got families. A lot of them are of that age when life is really busy.
Okay, so you're suggesting that the nominal category, you're associating age with a nominal category. Do you want to say a little bit more about that? Because you're talking about life stage stuff there when you talk about family and kids.
Yes. Now, they are spread right through the whole spectrum. So there are some older people amongst them. There's also some younger people amongst them, sort of under 35s, but the majority of them are 35 to 50. And so they're that age group which have children, and but also are working really hard with their work. And
what percentage of the overall population, like, do you have that breakdown of the 35 to 50-year-olds? If they're so these are 35 to 50-year-olds who are spiritual and religious, but who are not involved presently in a faith community. So what sort of percentage of this is it within the population that we're talking of, the 35 to 50-year-olds?
Of those 35 to 50-year-olds, it's probably about 13-14% of the population there.
13-14% of the population. So how many people would that be in Australia? That's a lot of people in Australia, right?
It is.
Yeah.
25 million. Now we're looking at adults, so 20 million.
Yep.
And so we've got 2 million adults overall who will be in that nominal category.
Yeah, right. Okay, so around about two. Let's just round it down to 2 million. Still a lot of people, right?
Yes, it is. It is. Yes. And about, as I said, about half of those people sort of attended when they were young and have dropped away. And quite a lot of them were sort of associated, on the other hand, with major denominations such as the Catholics or the Anglicans or the Uniting Church, where they've always been occasional. They've always been on the fringe, even when they were children. So they went for Christmas and Easter and so on, and they're still doing that. It's about half and half. Half have dropped away, half have just retained that position on the edges of our churches.
So how come some of these people aren't involved in church? You've mentioned that they're busy and so forth. Are there kind of other factors around this? Like within the article that I've been reading that you published, the Insights magazine, and we'll put a link again to that down in the description. But you talk about 4 different types of people, and in the categorization of why it is that people actually become involved in church and remain involved in church in the first place. So do you want to say something about that? Because I think that kind of identification is really helpful.
Yes, this came out of work that we did quite early on in the Christian Research Association. We did a huge study of 20,000 people across a number of denominations, and we identified 4 different patterns of faith. So one of the strong patterns that we find are those people who we call devotionalists. It was that personal engagement with God, which was really important to them. And it was important to maintain that personal relationship on a daily basis. They felt close to God. They wanted a God who walked with them. And church was part of that whole process for them. It was a place where their faith was renewed. It was a place where they felt close to God. So those people have tended to retain their involvement in church. And then there are those who perhaps go a little bit further than that. Their whole desire revolves around sort of the people in the church are the people who are saved. They're the ones who they're okay, and and their desire is to bring other people into that community. And so we've called them the conversionists.
The
And
conversionists. So,
yes,
so this
conversion
is
is the most important thing
yeah,
for them.
yeah. So this is one of the things that's really interesting because within a lot of the mainstream denominations, there's kind of this reaction to that
Yeah.
understanding of the world that we are the ones that have been saved and the world's evil, and we need to make sure that we save as many people from this evil world as we possibly can. And part of the way is for them to actually acknowledge that they've been saved by Jesus and become part of our community.
Mm,
So there's a reaction against that within
yes.
a lot of mainstream churches.
Yes, you find them particularly in some of the smaller, more sect-like denominations and so on. And yeah, and those with more extreme views in some ways. Yeah, but the next group are what we've called the conventionalists, and they were the people who said, look, what being a Christian is about keeping the Ten Commandments, and as long as you keep the Ten Commandments, you're fine. And many of us who are in pastoral work will have done uh, funerals with people for whom that was the big story, that they kept the Ten Commandments, they were good people, they were Christians in that sense, but they didn't see, many of them didn't see a need to go to church. Some of them do. For some of them, it was part of keeping a Sabbath day holy or whatever. But it wasn't as important. It wasn't as critical as it was for the devotionalists and so on. And while that was true of a lot of older people, a lot of younger people spoke of it more in terms of basic principles. So we call them principalists, if you like.
Oh,
And
so this is the fourth group. We're talking about the four
fourth
categories.
group,
We've got
yeah,
the conversionists, the devotionalists, the conventionalists, and now you're talking about the
the
principalists.
principalists. And the principalists don't talk so much about the Ten Commandments, but they do talk about the basic principle of life is to love others, to be kind to others, to have compassion, and so on. It's the story of the Good Samaritan is their guide. And again, they feel the same way as a lot of the conventionalists. Those principles of life are really important. But once you've learned them, certainly church is not necessary for maintaining that sort of faith.
So,
But
so in some ways, the story then gets the Christian story becomes, would you say, it then becomes more about the values and not
yes,
necessarily living them out within the community. Like you don't need to be a part of the community to live out these values.
that's right. That's right. Yes, certainly. I mean, it's a matter of being a good citizen ultimately, and the church helps. They see the church as helping people to be good citizens and to play their role in the wider society and so on. But attending church on a weekly basis isn't necessary. I think a lot of people who go sort of just a few times a year, those people who go to for Christmas and Easter and perhaps for some other occasions, and who certainly want a Christian funeral and may baptize their children and so on, a lot of those people would be principalists. And my suspicion is a lot of the nominal people would fit into that category. That the church is a good thing, but it's not necessary.
Um, it needs to exist to teach the values and principles and so forth, but not,
Yes.
you don't necessarily need to be a part of it. It strikes me that there might actually be a link here between those people who intentionally choose to send their children to faith-based schools.
Yes.
Would you agree with that? And can you make a comment on kind of how you think that plays out within people's lives?
Yes, I think that's true. They want their children to absorb those principles and to make them part of their lives. And certainly in the past, a lot of them sent their children along to Sunday school, even if they didn't attend church themselves. These days, a lot of it is a matter of sending their children to church-based schools. And of course, 40% of the population send their children to faith-based schools for at least part of their schooling.
That 40% is a big percentage.
40%. It is. It is. Yes, the faith-based schools plays a really big role in our whole education system. And my sense is that part of it is that they see these schools as having good discipline, good pastoral care, and that sort of thing. But my suspicion is, and I think there's some evidence for it, that they also think that absorbing the Christian values through faith-based schools is a good thing.
Is there something else about social justice within this, like within this principleless category? Is there something about like seeking justice within that as well?
Oh, yes. Yes. So that's certainly one of the expressions of those basic Christian principles for a lot of those people. So, the Good Samaritan, as I said, leads to social justice. It leads to sort of helping those who are vulnerable, those who are poor in our society. And in fact, I mean, a lot of these people do become involved in a whole multitude of organizations that are active in those sorts of ways and see themselves, I think, as expressing their faith in that way.
So when they're invited to like contribute to a cause and so forth, they wouldn't see this as they would see this as a kind of a spiritual and a religious expression. Are you suggesting?
Yes, I think they would. I think they would. It's interesting that 90% of these people say that religion helps shape their lives.
Sorry, 90% of which category you're talking now?
The nominal people.
Yeah.
The nominal people who don't attend a church.
Yep.
Continue to say that religion helps shape their lives.
90%. So this is actually like, if 90% of these people are saying religion shapes their lives, then religion is actually, if we assume, I mean, I know there's not all of them are Christian, right? Who answer that way on the census.
Most of them are, though.
Yeah, most of them are. That's right. So that's a lot of people saying that their Christian faith is actually having a big impact in their life.
Yes. Yes.
So
yes.
So what does this mean then about the way that we do Christian community, a way that we could potentially engage these people more so that, they take on, maybe they take on some of this kind of devotional kind of aspect to it as well. Like, how do we do Christian community so that we actually engage these people? Because it seems to be like it's kind of a in some senses the low hanging fruit.
Yes, that's right. Let's see if we explore something of their attitudes to the church just a little bit more. I mean, one of the things they say is that churches are good for making friends. They also affirm that churches are good places to help people in times of trouble. On the other hand, they are concerned, most of them are concerned that the churches have a bit too much power. And they are concerned about the institutionalism, I think, of the churches. Certainly.
So when you say institutionalism, what do you actually mean by the institutionalism?
I think my sense is a lot of these people feel that a lot of the money, a lot of the time goes into supporting the structures of religion.
I'm not sure that that's restricted to the people who are outside the church.
No. I don't think it is, but it's more. It is a barrier to involvement, I think, for some people, and there's a wariness, I suspect, of wanting to get involved in supporting these structures rather than living out this faith of compassion, of social justice, um, of doing good for people in the wider society. And I mean, quite a lot of these people may well be engaged in our social welfare activities already, um, and be expressing their faith through them, but they don't feel they want to come to church. Um, there was a superb example. I remember a few years ago, I was out in a country town in Western District, and they talked about the various ways in which the church was sort of trying to survive in this small country town and raising money and so on. And the idea came up that someone might give the church some land and others might farm it and then sell the produce and so on. And the people in the church were amazed that the people who rallied around and said, oh, yes, they do that, but they weren't interested in actually coming to a service. So they wanted to help out. They wanted to do a good thing, but services were not where they were at. And certainly they didn't want to get involved in that sort of way in the life of the church. So my sense is that these people would be open to perhaps, there's two different sorts of possibilities, but one of the sorts of things is to small groups that have require a limited commitment, perhaps have limited time frames around them. So it might be a meditation group, it might be a book club, it might be a walking group, it might be something that's exploring things from an educational perspective, but allows them to sort of explore and participate, but not get too deeply involved. And again, it's this sort of sense of commercialism that we talked about in the last session that people have. They're quite willing to spend some money and get a service as a result of that. And there are times when these people do want sort of, they'd like to make some friends. There are times when they're in trouble that they would like some assistance. But finding a way to obtain that without feeling that they're getting involved too deeply in something that could drain them ultimately, in terms of institutional life and structures and committees and positions and keeping buildings running and all the rest of it.
Yeah, so it really is then about trying to not be as institutional as you possibly can.
Yes, or at least have some of those activities which seek to engage people. And we've got to find ways of engaging people where it's a matter of personal invitation, it's a matter of publicity and so on, but engaging people in things that have that limited sort of commitment attached to them.
So one of the things that I want to pick up on, you made a point just before about the church in the Western Districts kind of being really quite surprised that people are wanting to get on board to actually help. My experience as the minister at Uniting Place in Hampton Park has always been that if you provide a vehicle, right, that is doing good, like you're providing an activity, we had a community garden, we had a meals program, we did a Christmas Day lunch, a hot three-course meal on Christmas Day. We had Santa giving out presents to families who were lonely or isolated. There would be no shortage of volunteers coming in from the community for that, like no shortage at all. And
yes.
this is part of the thing that I think most churches kind of, when they do something like that, they actually become surprised. And they become surprised that there is such goodwill in the community, but there's lots of goodwill in the community. And I think one of the things that I think is really important to emphasize is that God's resources are in God's community. And what we need to do is we need to work out ways to engage those people. And really what you're talking about is nominals. Now, you probably come across it, but Fresh Expressions in the UK, they talk about the de-churched being the open de-churched and the closed de-churched. And really what you're talking about here is the open de-churched, right?
That's right.
However,
that's right.
What you're saying is really encouraging in terms of this 90%. 90% of these nominals, the people who are saying that they are spiritual and religious, are saying that, they still draw on their faith to make decisions and so forth, but I don't want to be on a committee.
Yeah, that's right.
Really? I mean, effectively, that's what it is, right?
Yes.
I get enough of that stuff at work during the week. I'm busy enough. Life's complicated enough. I don't need to give of my personal time to be involved in committees as well.
That's right. And probably not that keen on listening to sermons either.
Yes, because there's something
very happy
in that,
to chat.
Right? Yes.
Another thing there, I think the principlism probably means that they're not all that interested in doing an enormous amount of deep exegetical work on obscure Bible passages. Can I be a little more even controversial and say that my feeling is that the lectionary has not served our churches well? The focus that is placed in terms of our sermons on exegesis of passages of the Bible, rather than dealing with human experiences and bringing the wisdom of faith to those human experiences, I think has been problematic. I think it's been detrimental to a lot of people's experience of church. I mean, they just feel that it's irrelevant.
So the interesting thing, though, is that, the denominations that stay with lectionary readings and have that lectionary cycle are a lot different from the, like lots of the Pentecostal churches that pick up a theme rather than a biblical passage. Do you want to say something about that? I think I know what you're going to say.
Yes. Look, I think that's exactly right. That certainly, I mean, I was a Baptist pastor and brought up with the idea of themes. Now, there's a real problem there because there are Baptist pastors who preach the same sermon using slightly different words every Sunday. And I was never going to get into that pattern. And therefore, I actually try to use the lectionary to have a bit of a broader scope in my sermons. On the other hand, what I do, I did experience within the Baptist Church that most sermons were very humanly orientated, that they were looking at the congregation and thinking through what are the issues that they're confronting and how does faith actually engage with those. Whereas when I got into the Uniting Church, I found that a lot of the sermons were really about exegesis of particular passages or philosophical reflections on them, that really one went home afterwards and said, well, okay, that was nice, but what did it mean? What was its significance? And sometimes it was a little hard to work that out.
Yeah. So, and in terms of this article that you've written, you've actually suggested that there is two different phenomena that's going on that we're seeing. Now, you've kind of mentioned one. The first one being about the way that we could approach this is to offer opportunities for people to engage around activities. Which I think churches have been doing for a long time, but they haven't necessarily done it in ways that's led to deeper kind of involvement. So that's something that I would suggest. Whereas now within the Fresh Expressions movement, we've got people who are leading kind of bush church where they go out into the bush and they have a walk in the bush and they do things. We've got people who are doing church in the park, that sort of stuff. So, or groups in the park. Sometimes it leads on to, but there's another phenomenon that you're saying actually kind of is actually happening as a response to some of these things.
Yes, and that's the large mega church thing. And it's been interesting in looking at the research done in the UK that the attendances at cathedrals has actually been growing while it's been diminishing in local churches. And also in Australia, I think the attendance at mega churches has been growing while it's been declining in those the smaller suburban churches. So part of that with the mega church, I think, is that people, again, do not have to have enormous amount of commitment to be part of those. They're not going to find themselves, when they first go to a church, offer the position of being sort of secretary or whatever it is. There's plenty of professionals who can do that in these mega churches.
So are you saying that the mega churches kind of plays into the deinstitutionalism in a way, because it means that commitment to kind of committees and so forth, and you can turn up when you want, put your money in the offering plate or set up a direct debit as they do, and it can be kind of a nominal sort of engagement, or not necessarily a deep engagement with that community. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yes, it is. Yes, I think the mega churches they allow that movement through them, and they allow the fact that there'll be a whole lot of people there one Sunday, and it'll be a different group to some extent the next week, and people will get involved in ways that are appropriate for them. So there's a whole range of activities and different things going on, and people will find those specific little groups. It may be a childcare thing, it may be, a walking group, and whatever it may be that they feel that they can engage with.
Fantastic, Philip. Thank you very much for your time. That's been an absolute blessing to everybody, because it gives really deep insights into the open de-churched people who are in our community. And we should be encouraged about how many of them there are. And we need then to actually, obviously, look at ways to engage them within our Christian faith community. So thanks, Philip. It's been a great pleasure once again.